I live in Metro Detroit, and I had the rare fortune to see an early screening of Kathryn Bigelow's new film, Detroit. And for a movie made by a bunch of coastal elite honkies, it was clearly written with the intent of having relevance to our current problem of police violence, but it did maintain a level of authenticity to the culture of Detroit. A great example of this is the first third of the film. It's comprised of these vignettes of different black Detroiters in the first few days of the riots, and it speaks to this idea of black disposability in America, especially in the case of police shootings. These human beings are there, in full existence and humanity, and then they're gone, unceremoniously. For example, there's a short little story where they show one man walking with a bag of groceries out of a grocery store that had clearly been looted. He sees the police and starts running, and their first instinct is to shoot him. He hops a fence and dies under a car. It's terrifying, and having these stories and characters shown only once exemplifies this metaphor of the minimization and marginalization of black people in America very powerfully. But on the inverse of that, almost all the main characters that remain into the story, into its more integral part of the Algiers Motel, are black. And it's such a great choice to do this, both for representation of black people in Hollywood films, but also because it would be an affront to Detroit to whitewash its history when the constancy of blackness has contributed so heavily to its wonderful culture. In the hands of lesser artists, and I worried this might be the case with the heavy push to highly billed John Krasinski, this film might have ended up with white protagonists and justified the police shootings to itself. Thankfully, it doesn't do this, and the only constant white characters in the film are the three police officers representing the absolute violence and sadism of racism exercised by Detroit police during this time. The isolation of white identity chiefly to these three characters is what makes them so terrifying, and you can look at it two ways. The monolithic view white people have of black people is negative, or you're at the mercy of chance how you'll be treated by a white person. The true terror of that is that no matter what, they're still in power. This is the dynamic explored in the Algiers Motel scene, wherein the police terrorize the people staying in the annex of the Algiers Motel. Everyone is brutalized, and some of the people are killed in a show of shameful violence meant to ameliorate the impotence that the police officers feel. This scene is sold almost entirely by the performances of the actors. Every single one of them nails it, and the emotion is visceral. My favorite casting in the film by far goes to John Boyega, who plays a man who knows how to play to a white man's fears to calm him down, and whose tenuous relationship between the worlds of white and black is articulated best by his accent, which doesn't quite have all the intonations of black Americans, but isn't purely white English, because the actor himself is British. It's a genius casting choice to show in a small way how the character doesn't quite fit in either group. Though he does try as best he can to help other black Detroiters, he sides more often than not with the whites. In his story, and in the end of another character, Larry Cleveland Reed's story at the Algiers Motel, there are fleeting glimmers of humanity shown by the white police officers to them. But the respite is sparse and short-lived. The gears of the machine continue to grind them up, and justice evades everyone in this story. It's harrowing, and the performances in the story are the film's high points by far. But where it really lags is in cinematography. The choice to shoot most of the film handheld seemed to be inspired by documentary footage from the actual events, but the style and the constant cuts are jarring, and they don't fit the period in which the piece is set, and the snap zooms are too ahead of their time to feel authentic. When you compare the look of the film to the look of the documentary footage they use in the movie, if they'd just been more restrained with the motion and ambitious with the color grading, the film would have looked like it was made in the time period. It also suffers in setting a tone that feels quite like Detroit in shooting none of the exteriors in Detroit. The point with the most visual and tonal synthesis for Detroit, though, is at the end of the film, when Larry is walking through the snow and goes to a church. It's there that he finds peace, and with the deeply religious history of Detroit, which goes back to the French settlers, it's a scene that feels like a final freedom from the terror into the true spirit of Detroit.